What an experience to witness even a sliver of a real state fair. Just a few days ago, while coming to Minnesota at exactly the right time, I saw for the first time an actual full-on to the rafters state fair. The only state fair that is bigger than the Minnesota State Fair is the Texas State Fair. I guess everything really is big in Texas, but the Minnesota State Fair has the most number of attendees year after year after year. It is quite a sight. And of course, one of the most indelible parts of any state fair is its food. There's an all-you-can-drink milk stand. There is food like pronto pups, which are done super quick and large on a stick with marvelous corn batter. There are fried pickles, 1919 recipe root beer, more now ethnic foods than you could possibly shake a fair stick at. Giant ears of corn on the cob, sandwiches, grilled cheese made on French toast, every possible food you can think of, and one of the fair's signature offerings, Aunt Martha's chocolate chip cookies, which if you get a bucket, it is up to the server to fill that bucket as high as it can go without actually spilling over. So if you want to actually put the lid on your bucket of chocolate chip cookies, you have to eat them down about 3 inches. They are served hot and fresh out of the oven. And we are told that on the top attendance days of the fair, which are probably this coming weekend, it closes Monday, that booth of chocolate chip cookies will produce, hang on to your kippot, up to 3 million chocolate chip cookies per day. Yes, we got a bucket. And boy, were they spectacular. But when you're standing at a fair of that sort, and yes, we did see the butter carvings, side note, they carve the faces of the State Fair Princess Court into 90-pound blocks of butter, one for each day of the fair. And that's a rather marvelous thing to see. Doesn't it melt quickly? We would say yes, but they're kept in a container that is held at 40 degrees. And given the temperature that was there the other day, we all wanted to go inside the butter refrigerator and be there with our coats on. But these are just a few of the features of this incredible fair. And while you're standing there and you're faced with all of these choices for food, well, of course, no one can eat everything. You may be remembering the character in Charlotte's Web, Templeton, the little rat, voiced by Paul Lynde in the famous movie, who goes to the fair, can't wait for the fair each year. Of course, that whole story is built around the state fair and the little piggy that goes off to the fair. Hold on to that thought. And the rat, Templeton, who loves the fair because people have so many food wrappers and extra food, and he just goes and sloshes around the fair and has the most wonderful time and never wants to leave. So for those of us standing there, though, wanting to support the fair and have something wonderful to eat, the choices are extraordinary. So what to do? Well, standing at the state fair is a little like being a human being in a world full of marvelous things to eat. And this Parsha knows what it is to look at the smorgasbord that is the world's table and ask oneself, where do we begin and what are we going to eat? Many of you know that my journey to a primarily kosher life took many decades, actually. And I don't struggle with it in the same way I used to, especially because I'm so fortunate to live in a time when we have so many plant-based options. And yes, there is a plant-based corn dog. I didn't try it. But there are so many options nowadays that to quote, keep kosher is really easier than it's ever been. But in the ancient world, when eating to survive, and of course, in so much of the world that is still the case, was such a profound challenge, the fact that there are so many foods that are, quote, off limits was probably quite a shock to the early Israelites. The word kosher, kashrut, does not appear in relation to food in the Torah. And as I continue with this journey for myself, with making those kinds of choices, looking at the options of the state fair or just the grocery store, and saying, what are we going to choose? How will we spend our resources? What will we put in our bodies? There's still a long way to go. So I learned today about a new minhag, a new custom that I found really fascinating. The Torah lays out these choices to maintain a sense of purity. And as I mentioned earlier, to give foods that were considered ritually or comestibly impure to people who were not Jewish or to strangers in our community would be immoral if we thought the food wasn't healthy. So there's some other purpose that the Torah, that Moses, that his divinely channeled voice was trying to impart to us. And the truth is, we probably will never know what these laws of choosing which foods to eat and refraining from others really is all about. It's about maintaining, though, I think, connection, a sense of mindful Judaism, where when we go to select from the menu or the banquet or the fare of life, that when we make a choice of what to eat, we immediately plug back into our Judaism. Everyone has to eat. So every time we take a bite of something, it's a chance to reaffirm our connection, our ties to this amazing tradition. It isn't easy, but it does deepen the experience of eating so that it becomes mindful, not mindless. And there is so much mindless eating that goes on in our modern world where food is plentiful. No one need go hungry. We have enough food to feed people around the world so many times over if we could but figure out a better way for distribution and sharing. So when we make our own choices, though, what ways can we be more mindful about them? I ask about nobody's food choices. They are entirely yours to make. But one of the ways that I find eating has become more precious and I can make a more aware experience, a conscious experience of eating, is to say a brief blessing before eating. And we have so many blessings. Even if you say the hamotzi, don't worry so much about which is the right blessing. We're not keeping score here. But if you could pause for 5 seconds next time you go to take a bite and just say a brief blessing of thanks, even if it's in your own words, you'll find that that space between the hunger and the satisfaction is that much more spiritually satisfying. And then this new custom that I learned from Rabbi Ruth Son, which I've not heard, perhaps some of you are aware of it, but I was not, that because this third iteration of do not boil a kid in its mother's milk, again, translating loosely, but you're all familiar with the concept, appears 3 times, twice in Exodus and here in Deuteronomy, because in our portion, the juxtaposition of do not boil a kid in its mother's milk comes right before the restating of the laws of tithing. Rabbi Son and her family offer this as a possible custom. They not only pause for a blessing and a moment of gratitude before eating, but at dinner time, her family regularly puts a few coins in their tzedakah box, in their pushka, the charity box, before actually sitting down to dinner. it seems that they don't do it before breakfast and lunch and snacks and every time, but for family dinners, they take a moment to give tzedakah, even if it's just a few coins or extra pocket money at the end of the day. I find that a wonderful thought and something that I actually would like to incorporate into some of my practice. It would make me, I think, more grateful for the food that I'm about to consume, and a reminder to do exactly as this portion teaches us, as it does so often in our Torah, but to remember those who do not have, and to, at a certain critical mass of gathering coins and dollar bills and whatever we've got around, to turn that into a gift to those who need. What an extraordinary concept that she brings forth. She says, instead of just wolfing down food and moving on to the next activity, we can learn from Jewish rituals to pause and turn the act of eating into a moment of heightened spiritual awareness. So whether you're choosing a fried pickle or butter on a stick or whatever it is that you'd like to enjoy from the fare, or go ahead, as the Torah portion says, get that bucket of chocolate chip cookies, they're not very big, and enjoy it to the last beautiful drop. Pause and make a blessing, and remember maybe to drop a few coins in the tzedakah box to help alleviate the scourge of hunger that still plagues us so dearly. Now, how do we do this with a goal toward unity? So that's the last thing I'd like to leave you with from this Parashat today. Rabbi Joshua Heller points out that at the beginning of chapter 14, which I had the privilege of reading today, we are told, Lo titgodedu. Verse I mentioned earlier, it's generally translated as do not make a gash or a rending on your skin when you hear that someone has passed. It's a sermon I've done, and I'm fascinated with Jewish mourning rituals and the way that they've adapted. But that's the verse in our Torah from which we get the practice of not cutting the skin, but instead making a tear in clothing for the first 7 days. So that's the general sense of the verse. But all the way back in the Talmud, in Tractate Yevamot, the rabbis looked at that verse and said what we should not make a gash in is in our communities, that we should not form ourselves into multiple torn subgroups, each following a different understanding of the law. Therefore, they taught there should not be 2 Jewish courts in one city, one permitting a practice and the other forbidding it. Now, wait a second, Rabbi Shana. Isn't that what we do all the time? And yes, you are right. That is what happens all the time and has been happening throughout Jewish history. This is not really something that we observe, to not divide into rival groups. But I think it's telling that the rabbis were trying to assert that principle, that we shouldn't be tearing ourselves in pieces. In every era, Jews have disagreed over matters of religious practice. We know that. The Babylonians and Jews who were living in Israel, Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, Hasidic Jews, and now all of the various movements and even competing groups within the movements. We've got questions about whether we should eat corn or rice on Passover, how to observe 1 day or 2 days of the holidays. So many practices have been codified and changed, and sometimes you can barely keep track of what is correct and what is, quote, incorrect from community to community. We rarely reach consensus, and we've usually held that up as part of our strength, is that we're not a monolith. So what I think the rabbis were trying to suggest, and this really applies to food as well, is that when we tear ourselves into groups that cannot talk to one another, or appreciate that there are different customs, and maybe learn from them, appreciate them, be amazed by them, even if they're not our own traditions, as long as they have an undergirding of mindfulness, of carefulness, of an achievement, or we hope a yearning toward holiness in our eating and in not just what goes in our mouths, but I would take it a step further and say what comes out of our mouths. That we may eat food that is prescribed and allowed and permitted and celebrated, but if our words to one another regarding food, regarding practice, regarding dress, regarding everything are not civil, then how can we claim to be fit and proper, quote, kosher people? This is so important. I can't be responsible for what other people eat or what they say, but I can look to this amazing tradition and make good choices for myself. There were so many tempting things at that amazing state fair, but one of the most remarkable exhibits there was called the Miracle of Life Pavilion. It's an unusual pavilion at the Minnesota Fair that has babies being born. Pigs, lambs, this year not any cows because of the avian flu, but already lambs have been born in the last few days, and litters of pigs, 18 and 19 at a time, to stand in the presence of fertility, of fecundity, watching grown-ups cheering for little chicks as they went up and down their ramps and their little playground enclosures, to be amazed at just the laying of an egg. It is cause to pause and give thanks for the miracle of life, to make mindful and good choices about what we eat, and to give thanks always, always for the miracle that is this life-giving earth. May our choices do us credit, and may we be kind with our words and deeds to one another. Shabbat Shalom.